Coming up on our newscast tonight. Samsung Electronics offered a formal apology to employees at its semiconductor and display production lines who fell victim to work-related illnesses. The world's leading chipmaker also vowed to step up efforts to compensate victims and protect the health of its laborers. The two Koreas hold another round of working-level talks. This time the focus was on making improvements to direct communication channels between the two sides, from copper lines to fiber optic cables. President Moon Jaein is set to cover more distance across the globe next week. An 8-day trip takes him to the Czech Republic, Argentina, and New Zealand, with the highlight being the G20 summit. News Center begins now. It's 8 p.m. here in Korea, live from our studio in Seoul. This is Arirang News Center. Welcome to our program. I'm Daniel Che. Samsung Electronics delivered an official apology to its employees who suffered from illnesses contracted while working with hazardous substances. The tech giant also promised to provide compensation and unveil measures to protect the health of laborers. Yongbyon has our top story.
Samsung Electronics formally apologized on Friday to those who fell victim to work-related illnesses at its semiconductor and display production lines. The tech giant's president and co-CEO Kim Ki-tack expressed deep remorse regarding the workers who contracted leukemia while working at Samsung's factories.
Samsung Electronics did not sufficiently and thoroughly manage potential health risks at our chip and liquid crystal display production lines. Today, we wish to express our sincere apology to those who suffer from illnesses and their families.
The president added the company will redouble efforts to settle the compensation issue by 2028, while donating some $44.3 million to the country's work safety watchdog to protect the health of its laborers. Those eligible for compensation include current and former employees who have worked for more than a year at one of the company's semiconductor and LCD production lines in Ki-heung, south of Seoul, since May 1984 when the plant was established. The scandal first emerged back in 2007 after a worker at Samsung's chip fabrication plant died of leukemia. The father of the victim, Hwang Sang-gi, who has been representing the victims, said he would accept Samsung's apology. He also called for more public awareness regarding work-related illnesses and strengthened regulations on worker protection.
Compensation is important, but what's more important is prevention. We need to strengthen work safety laws to ensure that workers and others know what kind of substances they are handling and give them the right to know and the right to participate.
Meanwhile, the Labor Ministry and lawmakers said Korean society should reflect on the issue and make further efforts to improve workers' health and safety. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
Delegations from South and North Korea met at their joint liaison office for working-level talks on communication channels today. Seoul's Unification Ministry says the two sides agreed to upgrade the direct communication lines between Seoul and Pyongyang from copper cables to fiber optic ones. The specifics, especially on how to proceed without violating UN sanctions, are to be discussed later on. When Seoul and Pyongyang restored their military communication lines earlier this year, exemptions were granted on North Korean sanctions to provide them with fiber optic cables. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un's proposed visit to Seoul will be a crucial opportunity to promote peace and denuclearization on the peninsula. That's coming from the nation's Unification Ministry at a regular press briefing today. Its spokesperson adds Seoul is making necessary preparations for the visit. Earlier this month, President Moon Jaein pointed out the government is preparing to receive Kim under the assumption that it will happen within this year. South Korea's Unification Minister also mentioned last week that the regime's leader could indeed make that trip by the end of this year and that it must take place. All eyes are on when the high-level talks between North Korea and the U.S. will take place after it was abruptly canceled earlier this month. The timing of the next summit between the leaders of both sides hinges on this meeting. Washington has been sending signals to bring the regime back to the negotiating table. Park Hee-jun gets us up to speed with the developments.
The U.S. has repeatedly made clear its hopes to hold a second summit with North Korea early next year. The two sides were originally set to hold high-level talks on November 8th, just after the U.S. midterm elections, to discuss the details of the summit as well as the North's denuclearization. But it was postponed at Pyongyang's request, citing a lack of preparations. Numerous reports quoting diplomatic sources say Washington has been pushing to meet in New York early next week, taking into account President Donald Trump and Secretary of State Mike Pompeo's departure for the G20 summit on the 30th. The U.S. has been sending signs to bring North Korea to the negotiating table. It has expressed support for the joint study of the Inter-Korean Railway project, which requires a workaround to sanctions on the North. Defense Secretary James Mattis also recently announced plans to scale down the South Korea-U.S. joint military exercise, Fold Eagle, scheduled for next spring. Should the North return to the nuclear talks, it would have to face the demands of an inventory of its nuclear capabilities and the shutdown of its key nuclear facilities, which the regime has been putting off until the sanctions are lifted. But the ball is now in North Korea's courts. It's unclear when it will respond to Washington's invitation, but time is running short to prepare for the next North Korea-U.S. summit. A positive response will not only mean a green light for the Kim-Trump summit, but also for Chairman Kim's proposed visit to Seoul. Park Hee-jun, Arirang News.
On a more somber note, 8 years ago on this day, Pyongyang unleashed an artillery attack on South Korea's Yeonpyeong-do island close to the border in the West Sea, killing 4 people, including 2 soldiers. To mark this solemn anniversary, the country's Marine Corps held a memorial ceremony at Daejeon National Cemetery. Marine Commander Lieutenant General Chun Jin-gu said the Marine Corps will continue to protect peace on the peninsula with its formidable strength, stressing true peace can only be maintained when a nation can protect itself. Seoul's Unification Ministry responded to Pyongyang's seizure of a South Korean fishing boat in waters south of the two sides' maritime border. Via the Joint Liaison Office, Unification Ministry expressed regret over what happened to the vessel earlier this month. Cho Myung-gyun also called on the communist state to take measures in order to prevent the reoccurrence of such incidents. On November 3rd, the regime's military officials captured the boat operating in waters off the eastern maritime boundary. The North Korean guards detained 11 crew members who were aboard and released them hours later, citing inter-Korean reconciliatory efforts. The International Atomic Energy Agency believes North Korea may still be operating its main nuclear site in Yongbyon. However, the head of the UN's nuclear watchdog highlighted the need to send inspectors into the regime so as to verify their latest findings. Lee Seung-jae shares with us his remarks.
The International Atomic Energy Agency has not had access to North Korea and its nuclear sites since 2009 and has mainly monitored the regime's activities through satellite imagery. But with reports saying North Korea may still be operating its main nuclear site in Yongbyon, the IAEA chief says on-the-ground inspections are needed in order to confirm the reports.
We have observed fabrication of reactor components and possible transfer of these components into the reactor, IAEA. But as we do not have the inspectors on the ground, we cannot determine the nature or objective of these activities.
Speaking in Vienna on Thursday, Amano reported on information the IAEA has been collecting since August. He said components appear to have been brought into a light water reactor being built at the Yongbyon nuclear facility, indicating activity at the site. Other reports indicate North Korea has continued work at the nearby Guryong River in order to increase the supply of water available for cooling the planned reactor or possibly an existing experimental reactor. Amano reaffirmed the IAEA will do its part in making sure North Korea completely denuclearizes, as long as everyone involved works together.
The agency continues to enhance its readiness to play an essential role in verifying North Korea's nuclear program if a political agreement is reached among countries concerned.
Despite the recent stall in denuclearization talks, Amano says IAEA inspectors continue to prepare for their possible readmittance to the North. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
President Moon Jaein flies out for an 8-day trip to 3 nations starting next week. One of the key agendas include the Group of 20 conference in Argentina. Shin Se-min provides a glimpse of what to expect from the upcoming diplomacy tour.
A trip around the globe. President Moon Jae-in will be leaving on an 8-day trip, the longest in terms of distance since he took office last year. The first 2 days, starting next Tuesday, November 27th, the president will be stopping over in Prague, the capital of the Czech Republic, where he will sit down with Prime Minister Andrej Babiš. And from the 29th till the 1st of December, President Moon will be in Argentina for the highlight of the trip, the Group 20 conference. The topic this year, as the group marks the 10th anniversary of its founding, is building consensus for fair and sustainable development.
President Moon will introduce his administration's stance on global pending issues, as well as call for the support of the G20 member nations for the peace process on the Korean Peninsula and the economic opportunities that can come from it.
And that 3-day period in Buenos Aires is when the president will be shaking hands and sitting down with the world's movers and shakers. The presidential office, however, did not confirm whether or not President Moon will meet one-on-one on the sidelines with President Trump of the U.S., saying instead that such summit will be finalized in South America. The last stop of the president's trip, a state visit to New Zealand from the 2nd of December to the 4th, which will be the first by South Korean president in 9 years. There, he will discuss mutual issues between the two nations, as well as ways to create synergy for President Moon's new Southern policy and New Zealand's so-called Pacific Reset. The presidential office says the trip next week will cap a busy year of diplomacy by the president in the Americas, Asia, Europe, and Oceania. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
In the domestic political arena, the National Assembly passed some 90 bills related to the livelihoods of the Korean people. They include stronger laws on daycare centers, as well as measures to protect small business owners, depositors, and the homeless. The bills were non-contentious ones that had been slated for passage last Thursday, but that plenary session was canceled due to a boycott by some opposition parties demanding President Moon get rid of his environment minister, saying he was appointed without Parliament's approval. Now that the legislature is working again, rival party lawmakers are trying to finish their review of the government's budget proposal for next year and to pass as many bills as they can before the second week of December, when they face a legal deadline for wrapping up their budget review and the end of the regular session. The nation's terms of trade dipped in October. The 11th consecutive month of on-year slide is fueled mainly by a rise in oil prices. However, the export volume index hit an all-time high thanks to strong shipments of semiconductors. Ko Ryuni help us look beyond the numbers.
Oil prices may have come down now, but the high prices recently made Korea's imports more expensive. According to the Bank of Korea on Friday, the country's net barter terms of trade index in October came to 92.78, a decline of almost 9% on year. The net barter terms of trade measure the amount of imports a country can buy for each unit of exports, and it's now at an almost 4-year low. The central bank attributed the fall to high oil prices in September, which affected the numbers in October. In September, the price of Dubai crude, Korea's benchmark, jumped by almost 44% on year to more than $77 a barrel. Generally, if oil prices rise, the cost of producing industrial goods automatically rises too, and this has a direct effect on import prices. The BOK added that the index is likely to go up, though, due to the steady decline of international oil prices seen this month. Meanwhile, the export volume index hit a record high last month, thanks to strong shipments of electronic equipment. Compared to last year, the index jumped by more than 25%. The BOK said this reflects strong global demand for Korean semiconductors. Another reason was extra working days in the month, because a major Korean holiday fell in September this year rather than October. Ko Ryuni, Arirang News.
A new report by the WTO shows trade volume among the G20 economies expanded to a record high. However, the benefits from improved trade have been mitigated by newly implemented protectionist measures, particularly those coming from Washington and Beijing. Kim Jong-un breaks down the digits for us.
The World Trade Organization, in a report released Thursday on the Group of 20, says trade volume among the G20 economies in the 5 months through mid-October amounted to $481 billion. That's almost 6 times the amount recorded in last year's review and the largest since related data were first compiled by the WTO in 2012. The report also showed, however, that the G20 countries are restricting trade with a record number of measures like tariffs. It said during the 5-month review period, they applied a total of 40 new trade restrictive measures, including tariff increases, import bans, and export duties. Most of those measures, 79% of them, were retaliatory steps taken by the world's 2 biggest economies, China and the U.S. The report warned that its findings constitute a source of serious concern and called on G20 economies to take immediate action to de-escalate the situation. This was reiterated in a separate report by the OECD released earlier this week, which warned that the combined gross domestic product of the global economy could shrink by 0.8% by 2021 if the U.S. goes ahead with plans to charge a 25% tariff on all Chinese imports. Kim Jein, Arirang News.
Kim Jong-yang made headlines by becoming the first South Korean to become the head of Interpol. The career cop who dedicated decades of his life to police work here in the nation is looked to make sure the organization resume its core mission after months of scandal. He returned home today and shared his thoughts on his appointment upon arrival. Our Choi Si-young was at the press conference.
Returning from the 87th session of the General Assembly in Dubai, where he was named the first South Korean to lead the global investigative body Interpol, Kim Jong-yang held a press conference at Incheon International Airport. This is what he had to say.
Again, I thank the South Korean government, our police agency, and those who've been at my side during the assembly meeting in Dubai.
He also showed his appreciation for the member states that supported his appointment.
Member states have shown their trust and voted for me, and as the new president, I intend to meet their expectations.
Russian candidate Alexander Prokofiev was widely viewed as a front-runner, but concerns from the United States and countries in Europe that Russia may have abused a police agency tipped the scale toward Kim. Kim is the first Korean national to serve as the head of the investigative body. Kim will cover the remaining 2 years left in former President Moon Jae-in's term, who Beijing confirmed has been detained and investigated for allegedly taking bribes. Choi Si-young, Arirang News.
Let's turn the spotlight to another Korean that's making his country proud. Lim Ki-tack, the head of the International Maritime Organization, is elected to repeat his service for the UN body for shipping security. Oh So-young gets us better acquainted with the IMO's Secretary General.
With unanimous backing, the South Korean chief of the International Maritime Organization will remain in office for another 4 years. At the UN body's ruling council session on Thursday, the 40 member states re-elected Lim Ki-tack to head the organisation, which is responsible for the safety of shipping around the world. With a second term, the 62-year-old will remain at his post until 2023. Born in South Korea in 1956, Lim was appointed as maritime attaché, minister counsellor at the South Korean embassy in London in 2006. 6 years later, he served as president of Busan Port Authority, the governing body of South Korea's southeastern port. In 2016, he began his first term as IMO Secretary General. In an interview following his reappointment, Lim attributed the re-election to his role as mediator, having worked hard to narrow differences between advanced nations and developing countries in particular. He pledged to continue this role upon his renewed term. Lim said he aims to prioritise drafting specific measures to respond to climate change and come up with a master plan on how to align the IMO's objectives with those of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Oh So-young, Arirang News.
Moving on to other stories now, Seoul-Tokyo ties have soured in recent weeks over a number of issues related to Japan's wartime atrocities. With diplomatic tensions heightening, ordinary citizens representing both countries held a forum as part of efforts to foster mutual understanding. Kim Min-ji fathers this report using her smartphone.
Despite the deepening divide between South Korea and Japan over historical issues, efforts are continuously being made at a private level to help develop future-oriented relations between the two countries. This forum, which invites 50 civilian representatives from all walks of life from each country, is one platform that allows participants to share their insights and experiences to encourage mutual understanding and trust. Co-hosted by the Korea Foundation, Seoul National University, and Waseda University, the forum is now in its second year.
Seoul and Tokyo are having difficulty finding common ground on the diplomatic front. At times like this, civilian exchanges are especially important. We're hoping people can work through their differences, which in turn could support the government.
Bilateral ties further strained recently after Seoul decided to dissolve a foundation funded by Tokyo to compensate the South Korean victims forced into sexual slavery by Japanese soldiers during the Second World War, not to mention a court ruling in favor of South Korean laborers forced to work during Japan's colonial rule. The situation gave participants more than enough to talk about, with heated debates on various issues, including factors driving a wedge between the two countries and ways to overcome the disputes at a civilian level.
The talks probably have little impact now, but if they continue every year with more participants and they find middle point, I believe it could set the groundwork for the younger generation to build upon.
Many young Japanese don't have a bad image of South Korea as they like K-pop and K-beauty and aren't that interested in politics. If the participants return home and share what was discussed with their friends, I believe it can promote understanding about each other.
The participants saw eye to eye that such channels need to be expanded, regardless of diplomatic friction. They agreed that stepping up exchanges and getting more people engaged and interested is key, because at the end of the day, decision-making at the top level is heavily influenced by public opinion. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News, Chiba.
With a steady influx of foreigners chasing the Korean dream every year, the number of multicultural families is growing. Slowly but surely, the nation is being transformed into a more diverse society. But the question is, are Koreans ready to embrace such a change? Won Jung-hwan delves deeper to find out more.
The number of foreign residents in South Korea has more than doubled over the past decade, topping the 2 million mark in 2016 and accounting for some 4% of the entire population. The number of multicultural marriages has also seen a proportional rise. According to Statistics Korea on Friday, it accounts for 8.3% of the country's total marriages in 2017. But despite this, it appears the country isn't fully ready to embrace the notion that multicultural families are an integral part of South Korean society. To raise awareness among the public, a theater production was showcased in Seoul to touch upon this core social issue.
The show touches upon issues on how difficult it is to live in an unfamiliar country with people who you have never met before, and how hard it is to live in a society that is rife with discrimination.
The lead character of the show is a woman who moved to the US some 30 years ago, but is forced to return home after facing some harsh realities. The actress who played the role said she wished to give the audience a message of learning to put yourself in another's shoe.
Some 30-40 years ago, our people went abroad seeking a better life. Let's not forget what we have also gone through in the past. Let's open our hearts and accept foreign migrants with our warmest welcome.
While the country has been trying to adopt relevant policies and social structures to keep up with rapid social changes, it still has a long way to go to fully embrace diversity. This actress, who is also a foreigner living in South Korea, says it should all start from simple communication.
Communication makes it much more easier to understand people, because if you do not communicate, you have those prejudices and you just go that way. But if you talk, if you start a conversation and really get to know that person, you can get closer.
While the country's move towards a cohesive multicultural society is still an ongoing process, it is hoped that Texas Aunt will contribute to this transition, with the play set to run until this weekend at Seoul's National Theater of Korea. Won Jung-hwan, Arirang News.
Time to turn to Michelle Bach at the Weather Center for the updates you need before planning a weekend. Michelle, it's exciting news we have. Seoul is expecting its first snow of the season tomorrow.
That's right, Daniel. Today's Seoul marked the coldest day so far this season, and like you mentioned, tomorrow we are expecting to see our first snow of up to 3 centimeters, and a lot more for Gangwon province. Meanwhile, the southern regions will mostly get rain. And the snow will start after midnight and spread all across the country by early morning. Most of the precipitation should clear up before noon, but will still be under cloudy skies. Now tomorrow the mercury won't drop as much as today though, but Seoul still dipping down to 0 degrees Celsius, Daegu at -1 and Gyeongju colder at -3 degrees. And the highs in Seoul will top out to 8 degrees while Busan has 13 and Jeju almost heading up to the 20s. And temperatures will recover back into the seasonal average by Sunday with clear skies. I'll leave you with the weather conditions around the world.
That's all we could pack into tonight's edition of Arirang News Center. Thanks for watching. Here's wishing you an incredible weekend.